Ever wonder if TV execs in the 1960s were just tossing wild ideas at a wall to see what stuck? Welcome to the Forgotten Flops, shows so bizarre and baffling they didn't just miss the mark, they left viewers speechless. Which of these disasters did your family endure? Get ready to question everything you know about classic television. My Mother the Car, 1965. Some TV shows just boggle the mind, and My Mother the Car is in a class of its own. Picture this. Jerry Van Dyke stars as Dave Crabtree, an ordinary guy who discovers his late mother isn't haunting the attic. She's reincarnated as a 1928 Porter automobile. Not only that, but she communicates through the car's radio, doling out advice and nagging him about his life choices every time he tries to take a drive. The premise alone sounds like something dreamed up after a late-night brainstorming session gone way off the rails. NBC thought they had a quirky hit, aiming for family-friendly magic like Bewitched or Mr. Ed. What they got was a surreal mess. Each week, Dave tried to hide his talking car secret from his family and friends, leading to outlandish situations and desperate attempts at comedy. Critics didn't hold back, calling it one of the most bizarre misfires in TV history. Even Van Dyke later joked about how weird the whole thing was. Viewers tuned in out of curiosity, but the novelty quickly wore off and so did the audience. The jokes leaned hard on the absurd premise, and when that wore thin, there wasn't much left to laugh at. My Mother the Car limped through just one season, earning a reputation as a gold standard for TV flops. Decades later, it's still cited as a cautionary tale. Just because you can pitch the wildest idea in the room doesn't mean you should. The Tammy Grimes Show, 1966. If you blinked in the fall of 1966, you probably missed The Tammy Grimes Show, because almost everyone did. Broadway's own Tammy Grimes was handed a sitcom all about her zany, scatterbrained heiress character, Tamantha Ward. She was rich, eccentric, and supposedly irresistible to trouble, setting up weekly escapades involving mistaken identities, money mishaps, and frantic attempts to outwit her stodgy relatives. But the magic that made Grimes a star on stage evaporated under the sitcom lights. The writers clearly had no clue how to translate her theatrical energy to the TV screen, and every episode played like a slapstick sketch with no punchline. Supporting actors looked perpetually puzzled, and even Grimes often seemed one step away from making a break for the exit. The reviews were downright brutal. Critics called it a bewildering miscalculation, unfunny, and painfully out of step. The jokes fell flat, the pacing dragged, and no amount of Broadway charm could disguise the lack of substance. ABC pulled the plug after just 4 episodes, the kind of move reserved for only the most catastrophic failures. Today, The Tammy Grimes Show survives as a trivia punchline. Even die-hard TV buffs struggle to remember it ever existed. It's a reminder that network suits sometimes bet big on the wrong horse. In this case, the only thing remarkable about the show was how fast it disappeared, vanishing into TV history almost before anyone knew it was there. It's About Time, 1966-1967. Television in the 1960s loved high concepts, but sometimes those ideas spun wildly out of control. Case in point, It's About Time. Dreamed up by Sherwood Schwartz, the mind behind Gilligan's Island, this sitcom followed 2 astronauts who travel back in time and crash land in the Stone Age. There, they encounter a clan of cave people with perfectly modern haircuts and accents, who react to the new arrivals with confusion and comic misunderstandings. Every episode relied on wacky then versus now gags, cavemen baffled by wristwatches, astronauts trying to invent basic technology, and endless goofy mishaps. At first, audiences were curious, but the time travel shtick got old fast. Even the show's catchy theme song, It's About Time, It's About Space, About 2 men in the strangest place, became a running joke among viewers. When the ratings tanked, the producers pulled a desperate U-turn. Suddenly, the astronauts brought the entire cave family back to the 1960s, flipping the fish-out-of-water premise on its head. But instead of saving the series, it just confused the audience further. The storylines became more outlandish, and the show lost any sense of logic or fun. After just 1 chaotic season, It's About Time was canceled, its title living on as a perfect punchline for anyone waiting for the axe to fall. It's a textbook case of a good idea going completely off the rails, proof that even TV's biggest names can crash and burn when they try to out-weird themselves. Turn On 1969? Some shows take years to flop. Turn On managed it in under an hour. This so-called groundbreaking sketch comedy debuted on ABC with a mission to outcool and outweird Laugh-In. The result? A blinding blur of rapid-fire experimental sketches, computer-generated graphics, and punchlines that seemed to have been written by someone who'd never heard an actual joke. The network pushed the envelope, no laugh track, barely any plot, and a visual style that looked more like a technical glitch than intentional design. Instead of engaging viewers, it left them dazed and irritated. In some cities, affiliate stations actually pulled the plug during the premiere episode, leaving viewers staring at static or emergency broadcasts. In others, the phones lit up with complaints. Turn-On's debut was so disastrous that ABC immediately canceled the show, never airing a second episode. Industry insiders have called it the shortest-lived primetime series ever, a what-were-they-thinking lesson in TV history. The fallout was so embarrassing, even the people involved rarely talk about it. In a single evening, Turn-On went from next big thing to never speak of this again. Today, the show has become the stuff of legend, a cautionary tale about chasing trends too hard and leaving the audience in the dust. If you want to see how fast a big idea can crash and burn, Turn-On is the ultimate example. Sometimes, you only need half an episode to make TV history for all the wrong reasons. The Pruitts of Southampton, 1966-1967. You'd think a show starring the legendary Phyllis Diller as a broke socialite hiding her family's financial ruin would be sitcom gold. The Pruitts of Southampton, later renamed The Phyllis Diller Show, had all the ingredients: sharp social satire, snobby neighbors, IRS agents, and one of comedy's most distinctive voices. But the series never figured out its own personality. Each week, Diller's character, Phyllis Pruitt, desperately juggled keeping up appearances while navigating a house full of freeloading relatives and prying townsfolk. The show wanted to be a farce about upper-crust living gone wrong, a gentle comedy about family, and a sly wink at the audience all at once. Instead, it turned into a jumble of half-hearted gags and aimless plots. Even Diller's signature one-liners couldn't inject enough life. Critics complained that the writing wasted its star and failed to make good on the show's promise. Viewers agreed, and the ratings flatlined quickly. Producers tried a mid-season rebrand, but not even a name change could save this slow-motion train wreck. The Pruitts of Southampton ended after one season, quietly buried and barely remembered. It's a reminder, sometimes, even when you put a comedy legend behind the wheel, the engine just won't start. The only legacy is a spot on every biggest TV flops list and a lesson for sitcom creators everywhere. If you don't know what kind of show you are, nobody else will either. The Baileys of Balboa, 1964-1965. You know a sitcom's in trouble when its entire premise feels like a knockoff from the start. That's exactly what happened with The Baileys of Balboa. CBS, eager to capitalize on the success of Gilligan's Island, greenlit this coastal comedy about a blue-collar charter boat family butting heads with their rich, snobby neighbors on Balboa Island. Each episode tried to wring laughs from the clash between working-class grit and yacht club glamour, but the scripts were so formulaic, the only thing that sank faster than the Bailey's boat was the show's ratings. Every week, the same tired scenarios. A wild scheme goes wrong, the rich folks get their comeuppance, the Baileys save the day, and nobody at home laughs. The actors did their best, but it was hard to hide the sense that everyone was just biding their time until the next audition. Even the beach setting, supposedly a guaranteed draw, couldn't rescue a show with zero personality. CBS quietly yanked the Baileys of Balboa after a single season, letting it drift into TV obscurity. In the end, this is one shipwreck nobody remembers fondly. The Baileys of Balboa is a lesson for TV history. Not every idea that works once is worth repeating. Sometimes, it's better to just leave the copycat scripts stranded on the dock. Camp Run-Amok, 1965-1966. If you ever spent a summer at camp and thought, this is chaos, Camp Run-Amok tried to turn that experience into comedy gold. What audiences got instead was pure bedlam. The show followed two rival summer camps, one for boys, one for girls, filled with over-the-top slapstick, misbehaving counselors, and non-stop pranks. NBC wanted another hit like McHale's Navy, but what they got was a mess that even kids found exhausting. Every episode felt like a sugar rush gone wrong. Food fights, paint bombs, ridiculous misunderstandings, and adults acting sillier than the kids. The jokes were so broad, they could barely squeeze into the cabins. By the time the credits rolled, even viewers needed a nap. Camp Run Amok was canceled after just one season, leaving audiences and the network relieved that summer camp was finally over. Turns out, too much wackiness isn't always a good thing. The Tammy TV series 1965-1966. Spinning off from a handful of light-hearted films, the Tammy TV series hoped to charm viewers with homespun wholesomeness. Debbie Watson played Tammy, a sweet country girl tossed into city life with her eccentric relatives. NBC imagined it would be a fish-out-of-water hit, loaded with cute accents and feel-good misadventures. Unfortunately, syrupy scripts and tired country cliches left viewers longing for something with a little more bite. Week after week, Tammy's good intentions clashed with the hustle and bustle of the modern world, but the stories never caught fire. The series leaned so hard into down-home values that it forgot to deliver genuine laughs or surprises. Despite Watson's likability, the show just couldn't compete with fresher, funnier sitcoms. Ratings sputtered and NBC pulled the plug before Tammy could find her happy ending. Sometimes all the southern charm in the world can't save a show that's stuck in neutral. Mr. Terrific 1967. What happens when TV tries to cash in on the superhero craze without any of the magic? You get Mr. Terrific, NBC's answer to the question nobody asked. Stephen Strimple played Stanley Beamish, a mild-mannered gas station attendant who gained superpowers from a government-issued power pill. The twist? His powers lasted only an hour, and so did most people's patience. Mr. Terrific was supposed to be a wacky spoof on heroes, but the execution was clumsy and the jokes painfully predictable. Instead of thrilling rescues, viewers got endless slapstick and awkward attempts at humor. Even the special effects felt like a parody. Critics tore it apart, and fans of real superhero stories tuned out in droves. The show limped through one season before NBC called it quits, leaving Stanley and his power pills gathering dust in TV's forgotten closet. Turns out, not every hero is meant to save the day or the ratings. The New People 1969-1970. If you thought reality TV invented the idea of dumping strangers on an island and watching them struggle, think again. The New People was way ahead of its time, stranding a plane load of college students on a deserted Pacific island. With no adults, these kids were supposed to build a new society from scratch, a setup with serious drama potential. Unfortunately, what ABC delivered was a moody, slow-moving soap with too many characters and not enough excitement. The cast wrestled with deep topics, leadership, survival, ethics, but viewers just wanted some actual adventure. Ratings never took off, and ABC pulled the plug after only 17 episodes. The New People is now a footnote in TV history, remembered more for its failed ambition than its storytelling. It's proof that sometimes even a great idea can get lost at sea without the right map. The Hathaways 1961-1962. Let's get this out of the way. The Hathaways was a sitcom about a couple raising 3 chimpanzees. Yes, actual apes. ABC tried to sell this as heartwarming family comedy, starring Jack Weston and Peggy Cass as the human parents of a trio of showbiz chimps. The premise sounded wacky, but the execution was even stranger. Every episode revolved around training mishaps, household chaos, and the never-ending struggle to keep the neighbors from finding out they had primates living next door. The big problem? No one could relate, not even kids. The slapstick was tired, the jokes were forced, and the chimps often upstaged their human co-stars, not in a good way. Even ABC admitted later it was a disaster, quietly canceling the show after one painful season. The Hathaways proved some sitcom ideas belong in the jungle, not on primetime TV. The Ugliest Girl in Town, 1968-1969. Sometimes you find a show so bizarre you wonder how anyone ever approved it. The Ugliest Girl in Town followed a struggling Hollywood actor who disguises himself as his own sister to work as a British fashion model. What could possibly go wrong? Well, just about everything. Week after week, audiences cringed through mistaken identity hijinks, terrible wigs, and gags that aged about as well as a carton of milk left in the sun. ABC hoped the far-out concept would set the ratings on fire, but viewers ran the other way. The humor was awkward, the plot stretched thin, and even the lead actor seemed lost in all the costume changes. The show's short run became a punchline for TV critics and a cautionary tale for future cross-dressing comedies. In the end, The Ugliest Girl in Town proved there are some disguises even a laugh track can't hide. Mr. Broadway 1964. CBS was certain it had a smash with Mr. Broadway, a slick drama starring Craig Stevens as a New York public relations whiz who could fix any problem with style and charm. The concept promised big city glamour, showbiz intrigue, and high-stakes deals on the Great White Way. But after a few episodes, audiences realized there was more sparkle in a puddle on 42nd Street than in this entire series. The writing couldn't keep up with the flashy setting. Plots dragged, characters were paper-thin, and the drama fell flat. Critics called it style over substance, and viewers agreed. The show fizzled out after just 13 episodes. Mr. Broadway is a classic example of a network falling in love with an idea that looked good on paper but had no real heart. Sometimes you just can't fake excitement. Hank 1965-1966. Here's a recipe for TV confusion. Take one broke but ambitious young man, have him secretly attend college classes under false identities, and mix in a revolving door of wacky schemes to avoid getting caught. NBC thought Hank would tap into the youth market, but instead, it baffled viewers. Star Dick Coleman did his best to make Hank lovable, but every episode felt like a test nobody wanted to take. Despite a creative premise, the show's tone jumped all over the map. Was it a comedy about campus life or a drama about education? Audiences couldn't tell, and neither could the writers. By the time the show ended, the only lesson learned was that viewers want consistency, and maybe a few characters they actually root for. Hank graduated straight to TV obscurity. Diploma not included. Accidental Family, 1967-1968. When NBC needed another odd couple sitcom, they doubled down with Accidental Family, a show about as natural as pairing peanut butter with pickles. Imagine this. Jerry Van Dyke, playing a struggling Las Vegas comic, finds himself suddenly sharing a home with Lois Nettleton's character, a practical farm widow, and her young son. Why? Financial desperation. The two polar opposites are forced into one household, hoping their completely different backgrounds will spark laughs and warm fuzzies. Spoiler, it didn't. The humor was so forced, you could almost hear the scriptwriters sighing behind each punchline. Van Dyke mugged and quipped for the camera, but he looked more lost than lovably goofy. The supposed sparks between city slicker and farm gal never truly ignited, and even the farm animals on set seemed more interested in lunch than in the dialogue. The series never picked a lane. Was it a modern family show about blended lives, a rural fish-out-of-water story, or just a long, slow commercial for fresh eggs and tractor rides? NBC didn't know, and audiences didn't stick around to find out. Ratings plummeted, viewers tuned out, and the show was quietly canceled after only 16 episodes. Today, Accidental Family is a trivia question for die-hard TV historians and a warning to networks everywhere. Just because you can mash two ideas together doesn't mean you should. Sometimes the only thing accidental is thinking lightning can strike twice in the sitcom world. The Hero 1966-1967. Ever watch a sitcom about making a sitcom and feel like you're stuck in a never-ending in-joke? That's The Hero, a show where Richard Mulligan played Sam Garrett, a television hero who's actually neurotic and uncertain behind the scenes. NBC was sure that viewers wanted a self-aware comedy about Hollywood, but in practice, it played like a private joke nobody bothered to explain. Every week, the story revolved around Sam fumbling his way through showbiz mishaps while struggling with insecurity and public expectations. Mulligan, who would later become beloved for Soap and Empty Nest, tried his best to sell the part. But there's only so much charm you can squeeze from a script that's more awkward than amusing. The humor often depended on inside industry references, making most of America feel like they'd wandered into the wrong club. Critics called out the limp storylines and the lack of true comic punch, while audiences just tuned out. There was no real tension, no real laughs, just a lot of anxious glances and showbiz cliches. NBC realized pretty quickly that they'd missed the mark, quietly shelving The Hero after one forgettable season. In the end, the only thing this show was a hero at was making a fast exit from the TV schedule, leaving almost no trace behind except a warning label. Not every industry parody is built for prime time. The Cara Williams Show, 1964-1965. Network execs in the 1960s seemed obsessed with recapturing the magic of Lucy, and The Cara Williams Show is a classic example of that ambition crashing into reality. Cara Williams starred as a perky, quick-witted secretary who secretly marries her coworker, played by Frank Letter, at a company where workplace romance is strictly forbidden. The premise set the stage for a parade of madcap schemes and frantic cover-ups as the couple dodged bosses and nosy colleagues while pretending to be single at work. On paper, it sounded like a recipe for laughs. But the magic never showed up. The chemistry between the leads was stiff, and the comedy rarely hit its mark. Every episode was a marathon of misunderstandings and slapstick situations that felt recycled even in the 1960s. Even Williams, known for her comedic spark, seemed trapped by repetitive gags and weak scripts. CBS had high hopes for another sitcom juggernaut, but what they got was a pale imitation that didn't even crack a smile. Viewers quickly lost interest, and the show disappeared after a single season, fading into the long list of almost, but not quite, TV experiments. The Cara Williams Show is proof that you need more than a plucky lead and a clever setup to deliver a real TV hit, especially when the audience has already seen it all before. Rango, 1967. By the late 1960s, the TV Western was basically riding into the sunset, but that didn't stop NBC from saddling up with Rango. The network banked on the slapstick genius of Tim Conway, fresh off his McHale's Navy success, to revive a genre gasping for air. Conway played Rango, a hopelessly clumsy Texas Ranger, constantly bungling assignments, tripping over his own boots, and getting into scrapes that made the Old West look more like a playground. NBC hoped that packing the show with pratfalls, goofy faces, and endless chaos would be enough to wrangle in viewers. Instead, what audiences got was a parade of tired gags, flimsy plots, and side characters as memorable as tumbleweeds. The writing leaned so hard into slapstick that any hope for character or story got lost in the dust. Even Conway's famous knack for physical comedy couldn't save Rango from the quicksand of bad scripts. Audiences didn't stick around, and critics quickly dismissed the show as a lazy rehash of jokes from a different era. NBC pulled the plug after just 17 episodes, sending Rango to the same graveyard as countless other TV westerns. Conway rebounded in his career, but Rango remains a warning. Sometimes, not even comic gold can resurrect a dying trend or a show that was doomed from the start. Gidget, 1965-1966. Gidget is the classic example of a show that tanked on arrival but later became a legend. The series introduced a teenage Sally Field as the energetic, surf-loving Gidget, eager to ride the waves and navigate the social scene of California's beaches and high schools. ABC banked on the Surf's Up craze, thinking Gidget would ride a wave of teen enthusiasm. Instead, the ratings sank almost instantly. Despite Field's infectious charm and energy, audiences just weren't ready for a sitcom about a girl surfer tackling coming-of-age dilemmas with humor and heart. Each episode balanced light romance, teenage rebellion, and sunny comedy. But the mix never quite landed with viewers in the mid-60s. The show's easygoing vibe and beachy fun may have been a bit ahead of its time, and the network pulled the plug after just one season. The irony? Reruns turned Gidget into a cult classic, sparking movies, sequels, and TV spin-offs in later years. Sally Field's big break might have flopped at first, but Gidget ultimately became proof that sometimes the best stories just need a little time to find their audience. In its day, though, it was the TV version of a surfboard wipeout. Captain Nice, 1967. With superheroes storming television in the late 1960s, NBC thought they could capture lightning in a bottle with Captain Nice. William Daniels starred as Carter Nash, a meek chemist who transforms into the titular hero thanks to a special serum, but his real struggle was getting out from under his overbearing mother's thumb. NBC pitched it as a campy superhero spoof, hoping to cash in on the Batman craze. What viewers got was a barrage of silly costumes, clumsy rescue attempts, and a never-ending parade of gags about laundry and motherly nagging. The problem? The jokes were so flat, even the laugh track sounded tired. The superhero parody angle was already wearing thin on TV, and Captain Nice brought nothing new to the party. Daniels tried to power through, giving his all to the role, but the show's one-note humor quickly wore out its welcome. Critics called it desperate, and audiences simply ignored it. After just one season, Captain Nice was gone, disappearing into the TV vault alongside a dozen other superhero wannabes. The big lesson here: in a world full of superheroes, you still need a little magic and a lot more wit to truly save the day. So, next time someone calls the 1960s the golden age of TV, just remember these spectacular wipeouts. For every hit, there were plenty of oddball disasters that crashed and burned, leaving us with wild stories and a graveyard of forgotten pilots. Which of these flops would you actually watch for the train wreck factor? Drop your pick below, hit subscribe, and keep exploring TV's weirdest corners with us. Who knows what we'll uncover next? Television networks in the 1970s threw everything at the wall to see what stuck. Most of it splattered on the floor, faster than you could change the channel. One show got canceled after literally one episode aired. Another cost more than most Hollywood blockbusters and lasted 9 episodes. A third featured a detective paired with a malfunctioning robot that picked up Swedish radio signals. These weren't just bad shows, they were spectacular disasters that burned through budgets and careers alike. Turn On. ABC's answer to Laugh-In was supposed to revolutionize television comedy in 1969. Instead, it became the most infamous single-episode cancellation in TV history. The show featured rapid-fire jokes, computer graphics, and risque humor that made network executives break into cold sweats. At least one station, WEWS-TV in Cleveland, actually canceled the show while it was still airing, creating an urban legend that they pulled it after the first commercial break. Other West Coast stations refused to air it at all. ABC executives watched their phones ring off the hook with complaints and pulled the plug before the second episode could traumatize more viewers. The show was so controversial that it made stations on the West Coast refuse to broadcast it sight unseen. ABC canceled the show before airing another episode, making it one of the fastest failures in television history. Turn On proved that sometimes being ahead of your time just means crashing and burning in spectacular fashion. The show's sexual and political humor was too hot for 1969 television, but its legacy lives on as the gold standard for instant TV death. Co-ed fever. In 1978, Animal House changed comedy forever, and every TV executive wanted their piece of the gross-out pie. What they cooked up was Co-ed Fever, a raunchy college sitcom about an all-female school admitting its first male students. The show starred future character actors David Keith and Heather Thomas, in what can only be described as television's answer to a hormone-addled fever dream. CBS was so horrified by what they'd created that they canceled it after just one episode, making it one of the fastest TV failures of all time. The network had produced 6 episodes, but only aired one before realizing they had made a terrible mistake. The show was part of a wave of unsuccessful Animal House knockoffs that proved not every hit movie translates to television. Co-ed Fever joined 2 other Animal House-inspired sitcoms in early 1979, and by summer, all 3 had been canceled. The premise seemed foolproof. Take a successful R-rated comedy and sanitize it for primetime. Instead, they created something so painfully unfunny that even desperate network programmers couldn't stomach it. The show remains a textbook example of how not to capitalize on a movie trend. Super Train. Super Train made history as one of the most expensive television disasters ever produced. NBC spent $5 million just building the train set, and each episode cost nearly $2 million to produce. The show followed passengers aboard a futuristic luxury train that traveled across America, complete with a swimming pool, discotheque, and shopping center. Think Love Boat on rails, except without any of the charm or chemistry that made Love Boat work. Despite heavy network promotion, audiences simply didn't show up, and the expensive experiment was canceled after 9 episodes. The network desperately tried to cut costs by reworking the cast, but that only made things worse. The show was so notorious that Mystery Science Theater 3000 dedicated an episode to mocking it. Super Train proved that throwing money at a bad concept doesn't make it better. It just makes the failure more expensive. The train set was so massive that NBC had trouble figuring out what to do with it after cancellation. The show remains a cautionary tale about big budgets and bigger egos in television production. The Brady Bunch Hour. Take television's most beloved sitcom family, add songs, dances, and variety show skits, and you get television necromancy because the result was definitely populated by The Walking Dead. TV Guide consistently ranks The Brady Bunch Hour as one of the top 5 worst TV shows of all time. The shameless money grab attempted to recapture the magic of the original sitcom, but spectacularly missed the mark. Only one of the original Brady kids was actually trained to sing and dance, which was a big problem when over half the show consisted of musical numbers. Making matters worse, the original Jan Brady actress didn't even participate, leaving fans with fake Jan forever etched in their memories. Only Robert Reed himself seemed enthusiastic about the project, while the rest of the untrained, uninterested cast struggled through embarrassing musical performances. The show lasted just 9 episodes before ABC mercifully pulled the plug. Though the pilot was a ratings success, the show-within-a-show storyline was a complete flop. The Brady Bunch Hour proved that beloved characters don't automatically translate to different formats, especially when nobody involved seems to want to be there. Holmes and Yo-Yo. Detective shows were hugely popular in the 1970s, so naturally someone thought pairing a human detective with a malfunctioning android partner was television gold. Holmes and Yo-Yo follow Detective Alexander Holmes and his experimental robot police officer named Yo-Yo, whose constant breakdowns provided the show's comedy. Yo-Yo would randomly break into dance, pick up Swedish radio signals, or act like a skipping record during crucial moments. The show desperately mined laughs from the robot's numerous glitches, while Detective Holmes tried to solve crimes with his increasingly unreliable partner. TV Guide lists Holmes and Yo-Yo as one of the worst shows ever made, and it was critically maligned during its brief run. Despite the inventive flipping of the traditional Holmes and Watson roles, the show suffered from horrible writing and was canceled after 13 episodes. ABC wasn't completely discouraged by the failure and greenlit similar shows like Future Cop and RoboCop, proving that sometimes networks learn the wrong lessons from their mistakes. The show remains a fascinating artifact of 1970s sci-fi optimism gone wrong. Holmes and Yo-Yo demonstrated that high-concept premises need solid execution to work, something the writers apparently never figured out. Me and the Chimp. Despite sounding like an idea invented by rowdy 6-year-olds, Me and the Chimp was a real CBS sitcom that aired for 1 season in 1972. The show was created by TV legend Gary Marshall, who would later develop Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley, making this failure even more puzzling. The premise centered on the Reynolds family and their pet chimpanzee Buttons, who invariably got the family into trouble each week. Whether he turned off alarm clocks or ruined hand-drawn maps, Buttons was pure mischief, and that's literally the entire basis of the show. Just reading or hearing the title is enough to cause hysterics, and despite Marshall's involvement, it was a major flop for CBS. The show was almost titled the more grammatically correct The Chimp and I, but lead actor Ted Bessel objected to the change. Despite being created by the same producer behind other CBS hits, Me and the Chimp was canceled after just 13 episodes. The premise was painfully thin, essentially building an entire series around a chimp causing household chaos. The show proved that even legendary producers can misfire spectacularly when they don't have solid material to work with. Me and the Chimp remains a bizarre footnote in Gary Marshall's otherwise impressive television career. Three's a crowd. What if the newlywed game became a contest to see who knew a man better, his wife or his secretary? That recipe for disaster became Three's a Crowd in 1979. The game show featured a man answering questions about his personal life while his wife and secretary competed to match his responses. Whoever matched the most, answers won $1,000, but viewers got to watch marriages literally torn apart in real time on national television. Host Chuck Barris created this marital nightmare that seemed specifically designed to destroy relationships for entertainment value. Each question and answer was more cringeworthy than the last, and it was obvious the contestants weren't having fun watching their lives ruined on TV. Three's a Crowd is often regarded as one of the most infamous game show failures of all time. The show caused problems in viewers' marriages and was a general flop, leaving networks no choice but to cancel it after just a few episodes. The concept was not only painfully sexist, but actively harmful to the participants involved. Barris seemed to think that public humiliation would make for compelling television, but audiences couldn't stomach watching real relationships destroyed for their entertainment. Three's a Crowd demonstrated how game shows could cross ethical lines in pursuit of ratings, creating a blueprint for what not to do in reality television. Mr. T and Tina. ABC wanted to create a spin-off from Welcome Back, Kotter, but their attempt became one of the lowest-rated shows of the 1970s. The show starred Pat Morita and Susan Blanchard as a Japanese inventor named Taro Takahashi, who hires a ditzy American nanny to help him adjust to life in Chicago. The show relied almost entirely on cultural misunderstanding jokes, with each episode featuring the nanny misinterpreting Japanese customs, while Mr. T struggled with American idioms. What could have been a groundbreaking moment for Asian American representation became an uncomfortable parade of stereotypes that neither critics nor audiences embraced. ABC canceled it after just 5 episodes, though some sources say 9 episodes were produced. One writer reported that ABC had already decided to cancel the show before the pilot had even aired. The premise had potential to explore cultural differences with intelligence and humor, but instead devolved into tired racial comedy that felt dated even in 1976. The show was also one of the first sitcoms centered on an Asian American lead, but the execution was clunky at best. Mr. T and Tina remains a missed opportunity to create meaningful representation on television, wasted on lazy writing and cultural stereotypes. Dog and Cat. The name wasn't the only bad thing about Dog and Cat, which premiered in 1977 and lasted only 6 episodes after receiving terrible ratings and negative reviews. The police series paired rookie detective J.Z. Kane, played by future superstar Kim Basinger, with veteran officer Jack Ramsey. This was Kim Basinger's first TV role after working as a model, and even her stunning looks and cool Volkswagen Bug couldn't keep viewers interested. The New York Times described it as particularly repulsive, while audiences hated it and gave it awful ratings. The show followed the standard cop-buddy formula, but failed to create any chemistry between the leads or compelling cases for them to solve. The most interesting thing about Dog and Cat is that it launched Kim Basinger's acting career before she became a major movie star. The series tried to capitalize on the 1970s popularity of police procedurals, but brought nothing new or exciting to the overcrowded genre. The writing was weak, the production values were cheap, and the cases were forgettable. Dog and Cat proved that even future A-list talent can't save a fundamentally flawed television concept. The show remains notable only as a footnote in Basinger's impressive career trajectory. Blansky's Beauties, Happy Days spawned multiple spin-offs, but this bizarre attempt transported Nancy Blansky to present-day Las Vegas, where she managed showgirls while dispensing tough love advice. The show desperately tried connecting to its parent series by claiming Nancy was Howard Cunningham's cousin, but the timeline gymnastics made viewers' heads spin. Nancy Walker, known for the Bounty paper towel commercials, seemed completely out of place managing sequin dancers in the glitzy entertainment capital. Even more confusing, a young Scott Baio appeared as a character named Chachi, but not the same Chachi from Happy Days, creating continuity nightmares for fans. The whole enterprise felt like a rejected variety show concept, hastily connected to Happy Days to boost ratings. The show abandoned the wholesome 1950s charm that made Happy Days work for a generic Vegas setting that had no connection to the original. Nancy Walker was talented, but her character seemed to have wandered in from a completely different show universe. The concept was odd, the humor didn't land, and it only lasted 13 episodes before disappearing from television forever. Blansky's Beauties demonstrated how desperate networks could get when trying to milk successful franchises for additional hits. The show proved that familiar characters need appropriate settings to work effectively. Tabitha. Hoping to recapture the magic of Bewitched, ABC launched this spin-off centered on Samantha and Darren's now adult daughter working at a TV station while hiding her magical powers. Instead of the charming whimsy of the original, Tabitha was a bland sitcom with forgettable plots and serious continuity issues. The timeline made absolutely no sense, with Tabitha aging about 20 years while everyone else barely aged at all. Even more confusing, the show made Tabitha older than her younger brother Adam from the original series, completely breaking established family dynamics. The show was plagued with casting problems, recasting Tabitha with Lisa Hartman, and making her older than she should have been, according to the original show. 3 different actresses had played Tabitha in Bewitched, but none of them were cast in the spin-off, completely breaking the continuity that might have saved the show. Lisa Hartman played the role with charm, but without the chemistry of the original cast or Elizabeth Montgomery's magical presence, the spell was completely broken. The show lasted only 1 season before fading into complete obscurity. Tabitha proved that magical sitcoms need more than nose-twitching special effects to succeed. They need the right cast and creative vision. The show remains a textbook example of how not to continue a beloved television franchise. The Ropers. Three's Company was a massive hit, so ABC created this spin-off featuring the nosy landlords Stanley and Helen Roper, who moved to an upscale neighborhood where Stanley's working-class ways clashed with Helen's social climbing. The show attempted to capitalize on the enormous success of the original, but failed to realize that the Ropers weren't likable enough for people to watch them carry their own series. Without Jack Tripper's mishaps to comment on, the Ropers' marriage jokes grew stale faster than week-old bread. Norman Fell and Audra Lindley tried valiantly to make their one-note characters work, but their bickering about their non-existent love life couldn't sustain 30 minutes of television. The characters weren't funny or interesting enough on their own, so audiences quickly stopped watching. The Ropers worked perfectly as supporting characters who could pop in to create complications for the main cast, but they had no depth for their own storylines. The show did manage 2 seasons with 28 episodes total, and in the late 80s, a spin-off for the spin-off was pitched but pulled because there were too many sitcoms at the time. The Ropers demonstrated that successful supporting characters don't automatically make compelling leads. The show proved that comic relief characters need the main story to comment on, not their own separate adventures. Grady. After Red Fox left Sanford and Son, the network tried spinning off the character Grady into his own series. But there was one major problem. Grady was never a well-developed character. Fox wanted to develop Grady and make it into a great show, but the character lacked the depth and personality needed to carry his own series. The show followed Grady Wilson as he moved away from the junkyard to live with his daughter and her family in middle-class suburundings. Without Fred Sanford's abrasive personality to play against, Grady's gentle nature had nothing to bounce off. The show flopped pretty quickly, and audiences completely forgot about it within a few years. The premise tried to transplant a working-class character into a middle-class setting, but the culture clash never generated compelling comedy. Grady worked as Fred's long-suffering friend who could occasionally provide sage advice, but he wasn't dynamic enough to drive his own stories. The supporting cast couldn't compensate for the weak central character, and the writing failed to find fresh angles for Grady's new living situation. The show lasted only 1 season before NBC quietly canceled it and pretended it never happened. Grady proved that spin-offs need strong central characters with rich personalities, not just familiar faces from successful shows. Fish. Abe Vigoda's deadpan detective Phil Fish was the comedic highlight of Barney Miller, perpetually complaining about his hemorrhoids and impending retirement. ABC thought audiences would love watching this cantankerous detective become a foster father to 5 troubled inner-city kids in this spin-off. The premise transformed Fish from a hilariously grumpy colleague into an overwhelmed caretaker, completely changing the character's appeal. Without the precinct's ensemble cast and confined to domestic problems, Fish's cynicism became less amusing and more concerning when directed at children. The show tried mixing slapstick humor with heartwarming moments, but the combination never quite worked. Replacing workplace comedy with family drama robbed Fish of everything that made him funny in the original series. Vigoda did his best with the material, but asking a character known for complaining about his health to suddenly become a nurturing father figure was a bridge too far. The show lasted 2 seasons but never found its comedic footing or dramatic center. The show failed to capture a strong audience and was ultimately canceled, largely forgotten today, and overshadowed by Vigoda's more successful projects. Fish demonstrated that beloved supporting characters often work best in their original context, not transplanted to completely different settings. All That Glitters. All That Glitters attempted to flip traditional gender roles by creating a world where women held all the powerful positions, while men were treated as second-class citizens. The soap opera parody was created by Norman Lear and was supposed to provide social commentary through role reversal comedy and drama. Upon its release, All That Glitters was panned by contemporary critics and received overwhelmingly negative reception from audiences. The premise had potential to explore gender dynamics and workplace inequality through satirical storytelling, but the execution was heavy-handed and preachy. Before making it halfway through the series, the show lost half its audience, and 13 weeks later, it was canceled. The show's attempt at social commentary came across as forced lecturing rather than entertaining television, alienating viewers who wanted engaging stories instead of political messages. The role reversal concept quickly became repetitive, with the same gender-swapping jokes repeated in different workplace scenarios week after week. The production values were cheap, making the show look more like a low-budget daytime soap than a primetime satirical comedy. All That Glitters tried to be too many things at once without excelling at any of them. The show proved that social commentary needs to be integrated naturally into compelling story lines, rather than serving as the entire basis for a series. Gemini Man. This science fiction series followed a secret agent who gained the power of invisibility through a special wristwatch. But the show was plagued by terrible writing and unconvincing special effects. The premise tried to capitalize on the popularity of superhero and spy genres by combining them into a single character with unique abilities. The show was so bad that Mystery Science Theater 3000 had an episode dedicated to mocking it, and no one could determine whether the writing or the acting was more to blame for its failure. The invisibility effects were laughably primitive, even by 1970s television standards, making the central gimmick more ridiculous than exciting. Gemini Man had 11 episodes made, but only 5 were actually aired before NBC mercifully canceled the series. The stories relied too heavily on the invisibility concept, without developing compelling characters or interesting plot lines beyond the special effect. The show felt like a cheap imitation of better spy series without any of the wit, style, or production values that made those shows successful. The lead actor seemed uncomfortable with the material, delivering wooden performances that made the already weak scripts even more painful to watch. The show attempted to create a superhero franchise for television, but failed to understand what makes superhero stories compelling to audiences. Gemini Man remains a fascinating example of how a potentially interesting concept can be completely ruined by poor execution and limited imagination. The Brady Brides. The Brady Bunch spawned multiple failed spin-offs, but this early 1980s attempt was purely rooted in 1970s family sitcom nostalgia. The show followed Marcia and Jan as newlyweds navigating life and marriage in a generic sitcom format that abandoned the wholesome family charm of the original. The premise put neat freak Jan and her uptight husband sharing a house with messy Marcia and her fun-loving spouse, leading to predictable conflicts about cleaning and bills. Even Florence Henderson's occasional appearances as Carol Brady couldn't rescue the ratings from this painful domestic comedy. The show tried to update the Brady formula for married life, but completely missed what made the original family dynamics work. It only lasted 10 episodes before audiences and networks alike lost interest in watching the Brady sisters bicker about household chores. The writing reduced the beloved characters to one-dimensional stereotypes about marriage and domestic life. Remember how exciting it was when the Brady kids faced problems like breaking mom's favorite vase? Now, imagine those stakes lowered to arguments about whose turn it is to vacuum. The Brady Brides proved that childhood nostalgia doesn't automatically translate to adult entertainment. The show demonstrated how difficult it is to age beloved characters convincingly while maintaining their original appeal. Karen. Premiering on ABC in January 1975, Karen was a comedy series that followed the life of Karen Angelo, played by Karen Valentine, as she tried to manage her career and personal relationships. The show also featured early career appearances by future stars Ron Howard and Blythe Danner, who would both go on to have illustrious careers in film and television. The premise centered on a young woman working in Washington, D.C., while navigating the challenges of 1970s professional life, but the execution never lived up to its potential. The show tried to blend workplace comedy with romantic storylines, but failed to find a consistent tone or compelling character development. After a short 3 months and 13 episodes, the show was canceled, though it did launch the careers of Howard and Danner. The writing struggled to balance Karen's professional ambitions with traditional romantic comedy expectations, leaving the character feeling underdeveloped and inconsistent. The supporting cast couldn't compensate for weak storylines that never found their comedic or dramatic center. The show arrived during a time when networks were experimenting with career-focused female protagonists, but Karen never found its unique voice in a crowded field. The series remains notable mainly for featuring future stars before they became famous. Karen demonstrated that good casting can't save a show that lacks strong writing and clear creative direction. 3 for the Road. Aired on CBS in 1975, 3 for the Road had a star-studded cast and an interesting plot, but it still didn't manage to save the show from being a complete flop. The series followed a recently widowed photographer who decides to travel across America with his 2 sons in a Winnebago mobile home, searching for a new life and meaningful experiences. The concept had potential to explore themes of family, loss, and discovery, while showcasing different American locations each week. Unfortunately, the execution turned the promising premise into a tedious travel show with forced family bonding moments. The scripts relied too heavily on coincidental meetings, with colorful locals and life-changing encounters that felt completely artificial. Despite having talented actors and an intriguing concept, the show's production values were weak and the scripts were poorly written, making it an overall failure. The show tried to capitalize on the 1970s fascination with mobile lifestyles and cross-country adventures, but the stories never felt authentic or emotionally engaging. The family dynamics were superficial, and the weekly destinations became repetitive backdrops for generic life lessons. 3 for the Road lasted only 1 season before CBS mercifully ended the family's wandering journey. The show proved that interesting concepts need strong execution and authentic character development to succeed on television. Get Christy Love. ABC's 1974 show starred the beautiful Teresa Graves as Detective Christy Love, a tough police officer who worked for the LAPD's Special Investigations Division. The show might not have been a hit, but it remains memorable for attempting to create a strong female detective protagonist during a time when such characters were rare on television. Detective Love was known for her catchphrase and her ability to infiltrate criminal organizations using her street smarts and undercover skills. The series tried to blend police procedural elements with blaxploitation film aesthetics, creating a unique television hybrid that never quite found its audience. Unfortunately, the show was canceled after just 1 season, but Teresa Graves did a fine job with the challenging role despite the show's limitations. The writing struggled to balance serious police work with the campy elements expected from 1970s crime shows, leaving the tone inconsistent and confusing. The production budget was clearly limited, affecting the quality of action sequences and location shooting that the show needed to succeed. The show arrived during the height of the blaxploitation movie craze, but couldn't translate that energy effectively to television format. Get Christy Love remains an interesting artifact of 1970s television's attempts to diversify its programming with strong minority characters. The show demonstrated both the potential and the challenges of creating groundbreaking television during a transitional period in media representation. The 1970s gave us television gold like All in the Family, MASH, and Mary Tyler Moore. But for every classic, there were dozens of disasters that networks tried to bury forever. These forgotten failures remind us that even in television's supposed golden age, executives were just as capable of greenlighting terrible ideas and watching them crash spectacularly. Which of these catastrophic shows do you think deserved its quick cancellation the most? And here's the real question that'll keep you up tonight. If these disasters could get on the air in the 1970s, what absolute garbage is being pitched in network boardrooms right now that we'll be laughing about in 50 years? Imagine a time when Saturday mornings were sacred, when the glow of a box-shaped television filled living rooms with laughter and wonder. Yet behind the charm of Hanna-Barbera's animated empire lies a vault of forgotten experiments. Some were too weird, too risky, or simply too ahead of their time. Tonight we unlock that vault and rediscover 20 forgotten Hanna-Barbera shows from the 1960s that vanished into obscurity. Number 20, The Peter Potamus Show, 1964. When it first aired, The Peter Potamus Show was seen as a light-hearted adventure series meant for younger audiences. Peter, a purple hippopotamus with a sunny disposition, traveled the world in his hot air balloon, accompanied by his friend, So-So the monkey. Each episode mixed adventure comedy and gentle morals, making it a cheerful addition to Hanna-Barbera's growing lineup. But beneath its bright surface, trouble brewed. ABC struggled to market the show to older children who preferred action-heavy programs like Johnny Quest. Parents criticized its repetitive humor, while network censors cut scenes that mocked colonial explorers, fearing it would offend international audiences. The show's time slot constantly shifted, leaving loyal fans confused. Behind the scenes, the animation team was stretched thin, balancing work across multiple Hanna-Barbera projects. Production delays caused recycled frames and weak story continuity. Even the famous Hippo Hurricane Holler catchphrase failed to keep it afloat. By 1966, the show was quietly canceled, its reruns buried under newer titles. Years later, Peter Potamus returned briefly on Cartoon Network's Boomerang, but only as a nostalgic cameo. For a brief moment, the cheerful hippo floated across screens once more before fading again into history. Number 19, Wally Gator, 1962. Wally Gator was meant to charm audiences as a lovable alligator living in a zoo, constantly escaping in search of adventure. He wore a hat and collar, spoke politely, and dreamed of freedom. The concept was Hanna-Barbera's attempt to mix slapstick humor with quiet social commentary about conformity and individuality. But television executives found it confusing. Some critics saw Wally's yearning to escape captivity as an accidental metaphor for rebellion during a decade of social unrest. Southern affiliates worried the setting evoked uncomfortable racial symbolism and requested edits. Others simply found it too strange for children who preferred the simpler antics of Yogi Bear. Animation problems also haunted production. Limited budgets forced reuse of backgrounds and awkward character motions. Voice actor Dawes Butler delivered charm, but the scripts lacked consistent punch. Hanna-Barbera's creative focus had already shifted to newer projects like the Flintstones, leaving Wally behind. By 1963, the Gator's adventures ended without ceremony. Few toys were sold, and no reruns aired for decades. When rediscovered in the 1990s, fans saw it differently. Wally became a cult favorite, representing the lonely dreamer trapped in an artificial world. A forgotten cartoon with a soul that only time could appreciate. Number 18, Touché Turtle and Dum Dum, 1962. Touché Turtle was Hanna-Barbera's sword-wielding reptile knight, gallantly charging into danger with his loyal companion, Dum Dum, a shaggy dog with boundless optimism. The show was absurd, energetic, and designed to mimic the swashbuckling heroes of earlier decades. Children adored the catchphrase, "Touché away," but the excitement did not last. Censors soon noticed the surprising amount of swordplay for a kids' show. Some affiliates demanded edits, citing concerns about promoting violence, even though the battles were mostly comedic. Parents wrote letters complaining that the humor was too frenetic for young viewers. Hanna-Barbera reluctantly toned down the action, replacing daring duels with moral lessons. Behind the scenes, animators struggled to keep up with the fast production schedule. With limited staff, each episode was assembled from recycled action loops. Writers burned out trying to balance humor and adventure, resulting in uneven storytelling. When ratings dipped after one season, the studio shelved the character without fanfare. Touché Turtle later reappeared briefly in Yogi's Ark Lark during the 1970s, but only as a supporting gag. Decades later, animation historians viewed it as an early experiment in action comedy animation. Its charm was real, but its time had simply passed. Number 17, The Adam Ant Show, 1965. When The Adam Ant Show first premiered, audiences were amazed by its quirky mix of superhero parody and insect-sized adventure. Adam Ant, experiment. A tiny yet powerful ant lived inside an anthill laboratory and fought villains ranging from mad scientists to alien invaders. For a brief time, he became a pint-sized icon of courage, symbolizing the optimism and creativity of mid-60s television. But beneath the laughter and buzzing action, controversy loomed. Some parents believed the show's emphasis on atomic power reflected Cold War anxieties. Schools complained that children imitated Adamant's flight scenes leaping off playground equipment. Southern broadcasters even edited out certain jokes about science, fearing they mocked religious values. Behind the cheerful tone lay exhaustion within the studio. Hanna-Barbera was expanding rapidly, and its teams were overworked. Animation shortcuts became obvious with recycled scenes and looped action sequences. Despite its high concept, the series was produced under tight schedules, leading to uneven storytelling. When the show ended in 1967, reruns faded, quietly replaced by newer superhero cartoons with higher budgets. Yet Adam Ant never truly vanished. His tiny heroism influenced later parodies like The Tick and Freakazoid, proving that even the smallest of champions can leave a giant shadow in television history. Number 16. Secret Squirrel, 1965. Secret Squirrel mixed espionage parody with animal comedy at the height of spy fever, inspired by James Bond mania. The stylish agent known only as Secret Squirrel worked for the International Sneaky Service, battling absurd villains with gadgets hidden in his hat. Alongside his assistant Morocco Mole, he represented Hanna-Barbera's bold attempt to blend adult sophistication with kid-friendly humor. But the experiment backfired. Some parents found the tone too violent for Saturday mornings, as each episode featured gunfights, slapstick explosions, and dark humor. Censors cut entire sequences claiming they glamorized espionage. The humor was subtle, almost satirical, leaving children puzzled and sponsors uneasy. Inside the studio, tensions grew. Writers clashed over how far to push the spy parody, while animators reused footage from previous shows to meet network deadlines. Critics dismissed it as a cheap imitation of Bond films. Merchandise sales were disappointing, and the network quickly shifted focus to safer comedies. By 1967, Secret Squirrel had vanished from schedules. Yet decades later, Cartoon Network revived him in brief cameos, transforming him into a cult icon of absurdist nostalgia. Today, animation historians see it as a daring attempt to capture 60s spy culture through a cartoon lens years before parody became mainstream. Number 15. Frankenstein Jr. and the Impossibles, 1966. This bizarre hybrid series split its airtime between two drastically different worlds. In one half, Frankenstein Jr. followed a young boy scientist and his giant robot protector fighting crime across futuristic cities. In the other half, The Impossibles featured a rock band that doubled as superheroes using musical instruments as weapons. It was a chaotic mix of science fiction adventure and 60s pop culture, yet the show's ambition became its undoing. Religious groups protested the Frankenstein theme, calling it blasphemous for turning a monster into a hero. Parents found The Impossibles too loud and strange, fearing its psychedelic style encouraged rebellion. Some affiliates even refused to air episodes they considered too violent for children. Behind the scenes, Hanna-Barbera's creative teams worked tirelessly to meet deadlines. They recycled animation cells across both segments while juggling censorship demands from multiple networks. The result was a visually inventive yet unstable series that exhausted everyone involved. By 1968, the show disappeared from broadcast rotation, leaving few traces beyond scattered merchandise. However, it later gained cult status among collectors for its surreal blend of monster myth and mod culture. Today it stands as a symbol of Hanna-Barbera's fearless experimentation in a decade where imagination often clashed with public caution. Number 14. The Hillbilly Bears, 1965. When the Hillbilly Bears first appeared as part of the Adam Ant Show, it was meant to be simple, rustic comedy. Pa Paw Ma and the children Floral and Shag ran their mountain homestead while constantly feuding with their neighbors. The humor relied on exaggerated accents, slapstick, and family chaos, echoing the backwoods style of shows like the Beverly Hillbillies. Yet controversy arrived quickly. Some Southern viewers claimed the show mocked rural Americans, while others accused it of promoting stereotypes about poor country families. National critics called it tone-deaf and unfunny. Network censors pressured Hanna-Barbera to soften jokes that might offend real Southern audiences. The result was a show that never quite found its identity between satire and sincerity. Behind the scenes, the series was created during a frantic production phase. Writers reused gags from Yogi Bear, while animators juggled multiple projects. The rushed schedule led to inconsistent art quality and uneven storytelling. Even voice actor Don Messick admitted that the mumbling speech patterns frustrated sound engineers. By 1967, the Hillbilly Bears quietly disappeared without any farewell episode. Decades later, reruns surfaced briefly on Boomerang, where fans rediscovered its odd charm. What once seemed outdated now plays like a strange time capsule of American humor trying to bridge city and country worlds with more heart than Polish. Number 13. The Space Cadets, 1966. The Space Cadets were a team of adventurous children exploring outer space with their trusty dog, Countdown. At the height of the space race, this show aimed to capture youthful curiosity and cosmic wonder. Each episode featured heroic space missions battles with villains like Captain Skyhook and educational lessons about teamwork. But despite its optimism, the show quickly lost altitude. Parents and educators complained that its science content was too silly, while conservative groups warned against exposing children to space themes during Cold War tension. Some affiliates demanded edits removing references to space weapons, fearing political backlash. Production proved equally chaotic. The animation budget was minimal, and reused footage dominated entire sequences. The rushed schedule caused visual errors, with rockets and characters appearing inconsistently between frames. Meanwhile, ratings struggled to compete against flashy live-action science shows. By 1967, the show was canceled after just one season. For years, it vanished from broadcast archives until a few episodes were rediscovered in poor condition decades later. Animation fans now see the Space Cadets as a symbol of the 60s optimism and fear, blending adventure with the uncertainty of a world looking toward the stars, but unsure what it would find there. Number 12. The Abbott and Costello Cartoon Show, 1967. Adapting the legendary comedy duo Abbott and Costello into animation seemed like a sure success. The show recreated their classic routines with animated exaggeration, turning slapstick into zany cartoon antics. It was nostalgic, a bridge between old vaudeville and modern television, but the results were awkward. Critics accused the show of exploiting the late Lou Costello's image without permission from his estate. The humor that once thrived on timing fell flat in limited animation. Children unfamiliar with the duo found it confusing, while adults felt it cheapened their legacy. Censors also stepped in, cutting scenes they deemed too aggressive or violent, particularly routines that involved slapstick hits or explosive reactions. Voice acting became another problem. Bud Abbott voiced his own character, but Costello's voice was performed by Stan Irwin, which drew harsh criticism from fans who called it disrespectful. Behind the scenes, the production team struggled to blend classic scripts with new storylines. Hanna-Barbera executives hoped nostalgia would carry the show, but instead it faded rapidly after one season. Today, historians regard it as an early example of how nostalgia can misfire when not handled with care. The show's heart was in the right place, but its spirit remained trapped between eras, neither classic nor modern enough to survive. Number 11. The Herculoids, 1967. The Herculoids stood apart from every cheerful comedy Hanna-Barbera had created before. It was dark, bold, and filled with action. On the planet Amzot, a family of warriors led by Xandor battled alien invaders alongside living creatures made of stone, slime, and energy. It was designed to merge science fiction and fantasy years before such combinations became mainstream. Yet the network did not know how to market it. Critics found it too violent for Saturday mornings, and parents protested its explosions and battle cries. Episodes where creatures were vaporized drew the attention of watchdog groups. Censors forced cuts that ruined story flow, and networks moved it to unpredictable time slots. Behind the scenes, animators worked under immense pressure. The art style demanded complex creature motion far beyond typical Hanna-Barbera budgets. Each monster had unique textures that slowed production. Staff worked overnight shifts to meet broadcast deadlines. Though creators like Alex Toth envisioned it as an epic space opera, executives only wanted another toy-friendly show. By 1968, the Herculoids vanished from schedules. But in later decades, reruns captivated new audiences on Cartoon Network. Fans admired its raw imagination and powerful visuals. The show became a cult legend, influencing later series like He-Man and Thundar the Barbarian. Its legacy proved that even a short-lived experiment could inspire generations of dreamers. Number 10. The Banana Splits, Adventure Hour, 1968. The Banana Splits Adventure Hour mixed costumed characters, live-action segments, and animated shorts into a psychedelic variety show. show. Fleagle, Bingo, Drooper, and Snorky were bizarre musical animals performing skits and songs between cartoons. It was Hanna-Barbera's attempt to capture 60s counterculture energy in a family-friendly way. But the experiment terrified parents. The surreal visuals, bright colors, and loud music were too strange for comfort. Some newspapers called it television chaos, accusing it of corrupting youth taste. Rumors spread that the show's wild style was inspired by experimental art movements that parents did not understand. Behind the curtain, production was chaos. The costume suits overheated during filming, and the studio's air conditioning failed constantly. Writers clashed with musicians over tone, leading to inconsistent scripts. NBC executives panicked when early ratings fluctuated wildly. Still, the theme song became an earworm, sung by children across America. By the early 70s, the show ended quietly, replaced by safer programming. Yet the Banana Splits refused to die. Its music lived on through nostalgic covers, and decades later, the characters were reimagined in darker forms, proving that even the strangest experiment can echo through pop culture history. Number 9. Shazam, 1967. Long before superheroes filled every screen, Shazam offered magic and myth. The story followed Chuck and Nancy, two teenagers who discovered a pair of ancient rings that summoned the mighty genie Shazam. Together they soared across mystical lands, battling sorcerers and monsters with epic flair. Despite its originality, it soon faced criticism. Religious groups accused it of promoting occult ideas. Some stations refused to air episodes with heavy magical imagery. Letters flooded network offices demanding the show's cancellation. Hanna-Barbera reluctantly edited several episodes, removing genies and spells that censors considered inappropriate for children. Behind the scenes, the pressure was immense. The creative team wanted to explore Middle Eastern folklore respectfully, but budget limits forced them into repetition. Animation cells were reused heavily, and entire action scenes looped from previous episodes. Voice actor Barney Phillips delivered energy, but even that could not save it from declining ratings. By 1969, Shazam disappeared from television syndication. Yet years later, fans rediscovered it as a forgotten gem, blending myth and adventure in an era dominated by comedy. Today, it stands as one of Hanna-Barbera's bravest risks, a show that reached for the heavens but was silenced by fear of imagination itself. Number 8. Birdman and the Galaxy Trio, 1967. Birdman and the Galaxy Trio was Hanna-Barbera's ultimate attempt to merge superhero grandeur with cosmic adventure. Birdman, an ancient warrior empowered by the sun, fought villains across the skies using his solar shield and energy of Ra. Alongside him, the Galaxy Trio, Meteor Man, Gravity Girl, and Vapor. Man defended alien worlds with powers born from science fiction dreams. But the show quickly collided with controversy. Parents claimed the imagery of radiation and solar power reflected Cold War fears of nuclear energy. Critics complained it was too serious for children, while adults dismissed it as mindless fantasy. Some affiliates even censored fight scenes where Birdman's energy blasts resembled real weapons. Behind the scenes, Hanna-Barbera's studio was stretched thin, creating multiple superhero shows at once. The production staff reused backgrounds from Space Ghost and even recycled sound effects from the Herculoids. Budgets were tight, and episodes were delivered days before broadcast. The creative exhaustion was visible in stiff animation and abrupt endings. By 1968, Birdman faded into obscurity, overshadowed by newer shows. Yet in later years, his name resurfaced unexpectedly when Cartoon Network reimagined him as a parody character. What began as a forgotten hero turned into a cult phenomenon. In a strange twist, Birdman found immortality through irony, his legend reborn from the ashes of forgotten television. Number 7. Samson and Goliath, 1967. Samson and Goliath followed the adventures of a teenage boy and his dog, who could transform into a superpowered duo with the cry of Samson, power of Goliath. Together, they battled giant monsters, alien invaders, and evil scientists across a futuristic Earth. The concept aimed to inspire courage and moral virtue, but the execution sparked debate. Religious groups protested the biblical name, calling it sacrilegious. Educators complained the violence was excessive. Critics accused the show of promoting blind heroism without consequence. Even network sponsors grew uneasy about its tone. Several stations pulled episodes citing fear of complaints. Behind the curtain, animators faced grueling schedules. With just weeks to finish each episode, they recycled transformation sequences endlessly. The team barely had time to design new villains. Writers admitted they wanted to explore deeper stories, but executives demanded non-stop action. The result was thrilling, yet hollow. When ratings slipped, the show ended after one season. For years, it disappeared from television entirely. But decades later, collectors rediscovered it, describing it as one of the strangest superhero attempts of its era. Samson and Goliath now lives in animation history as a relic of ambition over budget, proof that courage and chaos often travel hand in hand. Number 6. Dino Boy in the Lost Valley, 1966. Hidden inside the Space Ghost show was a forgotten treasure called Dino Boy in the Lost Valley. The story followed Todd, a boy who survived a plane crash and found himself in a prehistoric world. Guided by his caveman friend Ugg and his pet dinosaur Bronte, he fought to survive in jungles filled with monsters and mystery. Audiences were fascinated, yet uneasy. Critics found the violence shocking for a children's cartoon. Scenes of dinosaurs attacking humans drew complaints. Censors forced Hanna-Barbera to tone down intensity, cutting out moments of peril. Parents questioned why such grim storytelling aired on Saturday mornings. Behind the scenes, the series reflected the studio's creative ambition. Artists wanted realism in the dinosaurs' movement and landscapes, but time and money were scarce. Animators reused entire sequences and relied on heavy narration to fill gaps. Despite these flaws, the show carried an emotional core of friendship and survival. By the late 60s, Dino Boy was gone, overshadowed by its companion Space Ghost. Only later did fans realize its influence on later adventure cartoons. Today, it is remembered as one of Hanna-Barbera's boldest experiments, a survival story trapped inside a superhero show. It proved that even within the bright world of animation, darkness could thrive. Number 5. Jonny Quest, 1964. Jonny Quest was meant to be the crown jewel of Hanna-Barbera's 60s catalog, a daring fusion of realism, adventure, and Cold War espionage. It followed young Johnny, his father Dr. Quest, their bodyguard Race Bannon, and Johnny's friend Haji as they traveled the world confronting spies, robots, and ancient mysteries. The animation was dark, stylish, and cinematic, unlike anything children had seen before. But the brilliance came with backlash. Parents and critics complained that the show was too violent for young viewers. Scenes involving guns, explosions, and death shocked audiences accustomed to comedic animal antics. Some networks even banned certain episodes in foreign markets, citing political undertones and depictions of Asian and Middle Eastern cultures. Behind the scenes, the production was revolutionary but punishing. The realistic art style designed by Doug Wildey demanded immense time and money. Hanna-Barbera spent nearly twice its usual budget per episode. The studio's resources drained fast and animators burned out. Executives panicked as costs soared while ratings struggled to justify the expense. By 1965, Jonny Quest was canceled after just one season despite critical praise. Yet the legacy never died. Its tone influenced generations from Indiana Jones to the Venture Brothers. What was once a commercial failure became a timeless classic, a reminder that visionary art often pays the price for being ahead of its time. Number 4. Space Ghost, 1966. Space Ghost was Hanna-Barbera's leap into pure space opera. Cloaked in mystery and wielding power bands of energy, the intergalactic hero fought villains across galaxies with his teenage sidekicks Jan and Jace and their pet monkey Blip. The design by Alex Toth stunned audiences with its serious tone and sharp, futuristic style. But networks hesitated. Parents feared the violence was too intense, while critics mocked it for lacking humor. The moody silence of its space scenes confused children who were used to laughter. Sponsors dropped out, and censors forced the studio to cut scenes of destruction and implied death. Behind the curtain, production nearly collapsed under its own ambition. Toth's artwork was so detailed that animators could not keep up. Backgrounds were reused constantly, and scenes were often shortened to meet impossible deadlines. Staff members described the work as both exhilarating and exhausting. When ratings fell after the first season, executives quietly ended the series. Yet decades later, Cartoon Network revived Space Ghost in surreal form, turning him into a talk show host. Through parody, he found immortality. What began as serious science fiction became absurd comedy, proving that even failed heroes can evolve into legends. Number 3. The Mighty Miter, 1967. The Mighty Miter brought prehistoric heroism to Saturday mornings. It told of a young caveman Tor who, upon raising his magical club, transformed into the powerful Miter protector of his tribe. Alongside his winged dragon companion Tog, he defended his people from monsters and villains in a world of lava mountains and ancient mysteries. The show's mythic tone thrilled young audiences but frightened parents. Complaints poured in that it glorified violence. Religious critics objected to the idea of a human drawing godlike power from a weapon. Network censors slashed entire fight scenes, leaving abrupt cuts. Inside Hanna-Barbera, the mood was tense. Artists adored the premise, but executives demanded faster output. Budgets shrank mid-season, forcing animators to reuse sequences from earlier episodes. Writers were instructed to soften plots and add humor that clashed with the serious tone. Despite these compromises, the Mighty Miter developed a small, devoted following. After its cancellation in 1968, the hero faded into memory. Yet later generations rediscovered him as an ancestor of modern superhero storytelling. Miter's primal courage and mythic strength proved timeless. He was not just another cartoon hero. He was a glimpse of animation daring to dream beyond its limits. Number 2. The New Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, 1968. Hanna-Barbera's boldest experiment combined live action with animation. The New Adventures of Huckleberry Finn followed Huck, Tom, and Becky, who escaped into a magical animated world. Each week they encountered strange kingdoms, evil sorcerers, and talking creatures while searching for a way home. It was groundbreaking, blending real actors with cartoon settings years before modern digital techniques existed, but audiences were baffled. Some found the visuals unsettling. Others said the concept was too complex for children. Critics accused it of disrespecting Mark Twain's work by turning literature into fantasy pulp. Production costs skyrocketed as filmmakers struggled with green screen technology still primitive in the 60s. Censors targeted scenes where villains appeared. Too frightening for younger audiences. NBC executives grew nervous and shuffled its time slot repeatedly. Crew members described the process as exhausting, with long hours and endless retakes to match human actors to animated backgrounds. By 1969, the show vanished after one season. Yet its influence survived in countless hybrid productions that followed, from Who Framed Roger Rabbit to Space Jam. It was ahead of its time and punished for that. A forgotten marvel that dared to merge worlds before the world was ready. Number 1. The Adventures of Gulliver, 1968. At the end of the decade, Hanna-Barbera turned to literary adventure once more with The Adventures of Gulliver. Inspired by Jonathan Swift's novel, it told the tale of Gary Gulliver and his dog Tag, shipwrecked on an island of tiny people called the Lilliputians. Together they searched for Gary's missing father while battling a villainous pirate named Captain Leech. Though visually stunning for its time, the show met resistance. Critics claimed it simplified classic literature, while educators objected to its fantastical reinterpretation. Religious groups complained about its portrayal of magic and evolution. Parents feared its darker themes were too intense for children. Behind the scenes, budgets were tight and creative exhaustion set in. The studio reused soundtracks and backgrounds from previous shows. Animators worked overtime, yet episodes still fell behind schedule. Despite strong writing and heartfelt moments, audiences dwindled. When it ended in 1969, Hanna-Barbera quietly moved on to lighter projects like Scooby-Doo. Yet decades later, The Adventures of Gulliver gained quiet admiration from animation scholars who saw it as the closing chapter of an era. It was not just a cartoon, it was the last heartbeat of 60s adventure storytelling before the studio turned toward comedy forever. These forgotten worlds remind us that even legends can vanish into static. Hanna-Barbera's 60s experiments dared to chase imagination beyond comfort and paid dearly for it. Yet every canceled frame whispered courage. Which of these lost shows deserves revival? Tell us in the comments, like the video, and subscribe for more untold histories from the vault of animation. The 1970s and 80s were Hollywood's graveyard of beloved characters. Studios took your favorite TV personalities and butchered them in terrible spin-offs that made you wish they'd never left their original shows. Were these disasters inevitable, or did network greed destroy television magic forever? Number 15. Grady, 1973 to 1974. This disaster took Whitman Mayo's lovable Grady Wilson from Sanford and Son and dumped him into his own show faster than you could say ratings grab. Grady moves in with his daughter's family, and suddenly everything that made him charming on the original show vanished into thin air. The problem? Grady was never developed as a lead character, just a quirky neighbor who worked perfectly in small doses. NBC thought they could stretch 10 minutes of material into 22 episodes. They were dead wrong. The show flopped spectacularly, pulling in ratings so bad that even Red Fox couldn't save it when he tried producing later episodes. Critics called it painfully thin, and audiences agreed by staying away in droves. Grady lasted exactly one season, proving that sometimes supporting characters should stay exactly where they belong. The failure was so complete that it practically ended Mayo's television career. By the time Sanford and Son ended, Grady was already a forgotten footnote. The lesson? Just because someone's funny for 5 minutes doesn't mean they can carry 30. Number 14. Mrs. Columbo, 1779 to 1980. NBC took one of television's greatest detective characters and committed the ultimate crime. They made a show about his wife. Nobody asked for this, nobody wanted this, and Peter Falk himself hated the very idea of it. The premise was insulting from day one. Coincidentally, Mrs. Columbo just happens to be as brilliant at solving mysteries as her famous husband, despite never being mentioned as having any detective experience. Kate Mulgrew tried her best, but the scripts were garbage and the concept was fundamentally flawed. The show was so divorced from the original that they eventually changed the title to Kate Loves a Mystery and pretended it wasn't connected to Columbo at all. Even that desperate move couldn't save it. The ratings were terrible, critics savaged it, and fans of the original series felt betrayed. The show lasted 13 episodes before NBC put it out of its misery. Later, Columbo episodes would hint that Mrs. Columbo never existed, essentially declaring the spin-off non-canon. It remains one of the most unnecessary television experiments ever attempted. The failure was so complete that it's still used as an example of how not to create a spin-off. Number 13. Tabitha, 1976 to 1977. Bewitched ended in 1972, but ABC wasn't ready to let the magic die. They brought back Tabitha Stevens as a grown woman working in television production, trying to use her witch powers in the modern world. The timing was all wrong, the casting was questionable, and the magic was completely gone. Lisa Hartman did her best, but she couldn't recapture the charm that made the original series special. The show felt like a cheap imitation, trading the suburban family comedy of Bewitched for workplace sitcom cliches. Critics noted that the show suffered from the same time continuity problems that plagued many 70s spin-offs. Tabitha was supposed to be in her 20s, but the timeline didn't match up with when Bewitched ended. The powers that made her special as a child felt forced and artificial when she used them as an adult. ABC initially ordered 13 episodes, but only aired 11 before pulling the plug. The show couldn't compete with established hits like Happy Days and Good Times. Fans of the original series felt like they were watching someone else entirely. The failure effectively ended any hope of reviving the Bewitched franchise. Magic, it turned out, doesn't always work twice. Number 12. Who's Watching the Kids? 1978. NBC took a failed idea and made it worse by recycling it from another failure. This show was essentially Blansky's Beauties with different names, featuring many of the same actors who had already bombed once. The premise involved two Las Vegas showgirls trying to raise their younger siblings while pursuing their careers. It was every terrible 70s sitcom cliché rolled into one unwatchable mess. The jokes were stale, the situations were contrived, and the chemistry between the leads was non-existent. Critics noted that the show felt like a desperate attempt to capitalize on the success of Laverne and Shirley without understanding what made that show work. The writing was formulaic, relying on tired gags about ditzy blondes and wisecracking kids. NBC scheduled it against tough competition, and the ratings were predictably awful. The show managed only 9 episodes before getting canceled, making it one of the shortest-lived sitcoms of the decade. Even worse, it wasted the talents of actors who had shown promise in other projects. The failure was so complete that most of the cast disappeared from television entirely. Industry insiders called it one of the biggest wastes of network money in 1978. Number 11. The Brady Brides, 1981. CBS took 2 of America's favorite TV daughters and turned them into newlywed disasters that nobody wanted to watch. Marcia and Jan Brady get married in a terrible TV movie. Then the network decided to chop it up and turn it into an even worse sitcom. The premise was painfully forced. 2 sisters marry men with completely opposite personalities, and all 4 live in the same house. The charm of the Brady Bunch came from the whole family dynamic, not just 2 characters. Maureen McCormick and Eve Plum tried to recapture their childhood chemistry, but they were playing adults stuck in a juvenile setup. The writing was terrible, filled with forced conflicts and situations that made no sense. Critics noted that the show suffered from the fundamental problem of splitting up the Brady family. Jan's marriage to a stuffy professor and Marcia's wedding to a laid-back toy salesman created artificial tension without any real humor. The ratings were so bad that CBS canceled it after just 10 episodes. Even worse, the show's failure tainted any future Brady reunion projects. The concept was so fundamentally flawed that even nostalgic viewers couldn't stomach it. It remains one of the most pointless sitcom spin-offs ever created. Number 10, The Ropers, 1979 to 1980. ABC took two of Three's Company's most beloved supporting characters and destroyed them in their own show. Stanley and Helen Roper were perfect as nosy landlords, but terrible as lead characters. The spin-off moved them from their familiar apartment building to an upscale neighborhood where they didn't belong. Norman Fell didn't even want to do the show, fearing it would ruin a good thing. He was absolutely right. The chemistry that made the Ropers funny on Three's Company completely disappeared when they became the main focus. Their bickering worked in small doses but became tiresome when stretched to 30 minutes. The new supporting characters were terrible, especially Jeffrey Tambor's insufferable neighbor. ABC promised Fell and Lindley they could return to Three's Company if the spin-off failed within a year. The show lasted exactly 1 day longer than that promise, leaving both actors unemployed when it got canceled. Time magazine ranked it number 2 on their list of worst TV spin-offs. TV Guide called it the 49th worst series of all time. The failure was so complete that Don Knotts became the permanent replacement on Three's Company. Even the actors later admitted the spin-off was a mistake they wish they'd never made. Number 9, Gloria, 1982 to 1983. CBS took Archie Bunker's daughter and gave her a show that missed everything that made All in the Family special. Gloria Stevick moves to upstate New York as a single mother, trying to balance work and raising her son. The problem? Gloria was never interesting enough to carry her own show, and without the family dynamic that made her worthwhile, she was just another whining sitcom protagonist. Sally Struthers tried her best, but the writing was generic sitcom garbage that could have starred anyone. The show abandoned the social commentary and political edge that made All in the Family groundbreaking. Instead of tackling important issues, Gloria dealt with workplace comedy and dating mishaps. Critics noted that the show felt like a pale imitation of better single-mother sitcoms. The ratings were terrible from the start, and CBS moved it around the schedule trying to find an audience. Nothing worked because the show had no identity beyond being an All in the Family spin-off. Norman Lear himself seemed to lose interest, focusing on other projects while Gloria floundered. The show lasted exactly 1 season, making it one of the shortest-lived sitcoms in CBS history. Even worse, it hurt Struthers' career, typecast her as a difficult actress to work with. The failure proved that successful ensemble shows can't always spawn successful solo vehicles. Number 8, Three's a Crowd, 1984 to 1985. ABC took Jack Tripper from Three's Company and stranded him in a show that forgot everything that made the original work. Jack moves in with his girlfriend and her disapproving father, creating a setup that sounded familiar but felt completely wrong. The problem was obvious. Three's Company worked because of the ensemble chemistry, not because John Ritter was comedy gold by himself. Without Janet and the rotating blonde roommates, Jack became just another sitcom protagonist dealing with relationship problems. The new characters were terrible, especially the girlfriend's father, played by Robert Mandan. The scripts relied on tired sitcom tropes instead of the physical comedy and misunderstandings that made Three's Company special. Critics noted that removing all the supporting characters was a fundamental mistake. ABC only ordered a half-season renewal, but Ritter declined, effectively ending the series. The show lasted exactly 1 season, proving that even popular characters can't survive in the wrong environment. Industry insiders called it one of the most obvious cash grabs in television history. The failure effectively ended the Three's Company franchise forever. Even fans of the original series couldn't find anything to love about this desperate attempt to extend the brand. Number 7, Blansky's Beauties, 1977. ABC created this disaster by taking a 1-episode character from Happy Days and building an entire show around her. Nancy Blansky appears as Howard Cunningham's cousin from Las Vegas, then gets her own series the very next week. The show followed Nancy as she managed a group of showgirls while living in an apartment complex that made no sense. The premise was terrible, the execution was worse, and the whole thing felt like a desperate cash grab. Nancy Walker was a talented actress, but she couldn't save scripts that were written by committee and approved by executives who didn't understand comedy. The show featured future Happy Days stars, Scott Baio and Linda Goodfriend, but even they couldn't generate any chemistry or laughs. The Las Vegas setting was wasted on cheap-looking sets and storylines that could have taken place anywhere. Critics noted that the show suffered from the same time period confusion that plagued other Gary Marshall spin-offs. Happy Days was set in the 1950s, but Blansky's Beauties took place in 1977, creating continuity problems that made no sense. The show lasted only 13 episodes before ABC mercifully canceled it. Even worse, it was a rare ratings flop for producer Gary Marshall, who was usually television gold. The failure was so complete that most people don't even remember it existed. Number 6. Sanford, 1980 to 1981. NBC tried to continue Sanford and Son without the son, and the result was exactly as terrible as you'd expect. Red Fox returned as Fred Sanford, but without Demon Wilson's Lamont, the show lost its heart and soul. The chemistry between father and son was what made the original series work. Without that dynamic, Fred became just another cranky old man yelling at everyone around him. NBC brought in new characters, including a white partner for Fred, which felt forced and artificial. The writing was lazy, recycling old jokes and situations from the original series without understanding why they worked. Critics noted that Fox seemed tired and disinterested in many episodes. The ratings were terrible, and NBC moved the show around the schedule, trying to find an audience. Nothing worked because the show was fundamentally broken. The original series had ended at the perfect time, with Fred and Lamont's relationship intact. This attempt to resurrect it felt like grave robbing. NBC canceled it after just 14 episodes, making it one of the biggest flops of the 1980 to 81 season. The failure essentially ended Fox's television career and tarnished the legacy of one of the greatest sitcoms ever made. Even fans of the original series couldn't stomach this hollow imitation. Number 5. Richie Brockelman, Private Eye, 1978. NBC took a character who appeared in exactly one episode of The Rockford Files and somehow thought he deserved his own series. Dennis Dugan played a young private detective who was supposed to represent the new generation of TV detectives. The problem? The character wasn't interesting enough to sustain a single episode, let alone an entire series. The show tried to capture the cool, laid-back vibe of The Rockford Files, but came across as a cheap imitation. Dugan had no chemistry with the supporting cast, and the cases were boring and predictable. Critics noted that the show suffered from terrible writing and direction that made every episode feel like a rejected Rockford Files script. NBC scheduled it against tough competition, and the ratings were predictably awful. The show managed only 5 episodes before getting canceled, making it one of the shortest-lived detective series ever. Even worse, it wasted the potential of what could have been interesting supporting characters. The failure was so complete that Dugan's television career never recovered. Industry insiders used it as an example of how not to create a spin-off character. The show's cancellation was so fast that most viewers didn't even realize it existed. It remains one of the most pointless television experiments of the 1970s. Number 4. Checking In, 1981. CBS took Florence from the Jeffersons and somehow made her boring. Marla Gibbs was brilliant as the sarcastic housekeeper who could trade insults with George Jefferson. But as the lead character in a hotel setting, she lost all her edge. The show followed Florence as she becomes an executive housekeeper at a fancy New York hotel, dealing with rich guests and incompetent staff. The problem was obvious. Florence worked because she was the voice of reason in a crazy household. Without George and Louise to bounce off, she became just another workplace sitcom protagonist. The writing was terrible, filled with generic hotel comedy that any actress could have delivered. Critics noted that the show completely missed what made Florence special in the first place. The ratings were so bad that CBS canceled it after only 4 episodes, forcing Florence to return to the Jeffersons with a lame excuse about the hotel burning down. The failure was embarrassing for everyone involved, especially Gibbs, who had lobbied hard for her own show. Even worse, it damaged her relationship with the Jeffersons producers, who felt she was ungrateful for the opportunity they had given her. The cancellation was so fast that most viewers thought it was a very special episode rather than a failed spin-off. Industry insiders called it one of the most misguided casting decisions in television history. Number 3, Fish, 1977 to 1979. ABC took the oldest, crankiest detective from Barney Miller and gave him the worst possible assignment: dealing with teenagers. Detective Phil Fish retires from the police force and becomes a foster parent to a group of troubled kids. The premise was fundamentally flawed from the beginning. Fish worked on Barney Miller because he was the voice of weary experience among younger detectives. Surrounded by teenagers, he just seemed like a tired old man who should have stayed retired. Abe Vigoda tried his best, but the scripts were terrible and the child actors were annoying. The show abandoned everything that made Fish interesting as a character. Instead of dry police humor, viewers got forced family comedy that felt like a bad after-school special. Critics noted that the show suffered from tonal problems, never deciding whether it wanted to be funny or heartwarming. The ratings started okay but declined steadily, as viewers realized the show had no direction. ABC moved it around the schedule and eventually canceled it after 2 seasons. The failure hurt Vigoda's career and made it harder for Barney Miller to bring back the character. Even worse, it wasted the potential of what could have been a great retirement story for Fish. The show remains an example of how not to handle beloved character departures. Number 2, Maude's Cousin, never aired. CBS developed this disaster as a spin-off from Maude, focusing on her conservative cousin who moved to a small southern town. The premise was designed to create conflict by putting a liberal character in a conservative environment, but the execution was terrible. The scripts were heavy-handed and preachy, missing the sharp wit that made Maude special. Test audiences hated it. Critics who saw early episodes called it unwatchable, and even CBS executives realized they had a disaster on their hands. The show was supposed to star Rue McClanahan as Maude's cousin, but she wisely backed out when she saw the quality of the scripts. CBS spent months trying to retool the concept, but nothing worked. The fundamental problem was that the character wasn't strong enough to carry her own series. Unlike Maude, who was fascinating in her contradictions, the cousin was just a mouthpiece for liberal talking points. Norman Lear eventually gave up on the project, focusing his attention on other shows. The pilot was filmed but never aired, making it one of the most expensive TV failures that never saw the light of day. Industry insiders called it a perfect example of how even successful producers can completely misunderstand their own characters. The failure showed that spin-offs need to work as independent shows, not just as political statements. Number 1, Out of the Blue, 1979. ABC hit rock bottom with this Happy Days spin-off that featured an angel in training assigned to help a single-parent family. Random, played by Jimmy Brogan, was supposed to be a guardian angel who lived with the family while learning how to be more heavenly. The premise was so ridiculous that even children's television wouldn't have touched it. The show tried to combine family sitcom elements with supernatural comedy, but succeeded at neither. Brogan had no chemistry with the family members, and the angel storylines were embarrassingly bad. Critics noted that the show suffered from terrible special effects and scripts that seemed written by committee. The religious elements felt forced and artificial, while the family dynamics were boring and predictable. ABC scheduled it against tough competition, and the ratings were catastrophic. The show managed only 8 aired episodes out of 12 that were filmed before ABC mercifully canceled it. Even worse, it was so bad that it hurt the Happy Days brand, making viewers question whether Gary Marshall had lost his touch. The failure was so complete that Jimmy Brogan's television career never recovered. Industry insiders called it the worst spin-off attempt of the 1970s, a distinction it holds to this day. The show's cancellation was so fast that most viewers forgot it ever existed, which is probably for the best. Which of these disasters do you remember watching? Did any of them actually deserve to succeed, or were they all doomed from the start? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let us know which terrible spin-off hurt you the most. And here's the real question. Are networks today making the same mistakes, or have they finally learned that sometimes it's better to leave greatness alone? Television history has a short memory. Whole sitcoms slip through prime time like a bad transmission. And no one even slowed down to look. You think you know the 70s because you've seen the hits on endless reruns. But what about the nearly hits, the oddballs, the experiments that vanished before they could find their feet? Which shows deserved a second shot, and which were doomed the moment the pilot wrapped? Keep watching, and you'll meet a shy bassist, an android cop's cousin in spirit, and a Moscow apartment that could barely hold a laugh. Paul Sand in Friends and Lovers. Imagine being a gentle, lovelorn double bass player who lands a chair with the Boston Symphony Orchestra, then going home to a chaotic family that loves you loudly and doubts you constantly. That was Robert Dreyfuss, played by the wonderfully rueful Paul Sand, a rising stage star whom MTM built a full series around in fall 1974. The slot looked unbeatable. It sat right between All in the Family and the Mary Tyler Moore Show on Saturday nights, which sounds like a golden runway. In practice, it was a wind tunnel, the audience that came for a culture war, sledgehammer, and stayed for urbane newsroom. Sparkle did not want a nervous romantic murmuring his way through dates and rehearsal calls. The writing pedigree was serious. James L. Brooks and Alan Burns steered the ship. James Burrows directed episodes. 15 shows aired across the fall into early January 1975, and the ratings were not terrible, just not strong enough to prop up Mary. The premise had charm, the ensemble had spark, and the music hall specificity set it apart. What it lacked was a big comic engine you could summarize in one breath. In the end, the schedule punished nuance. CBS pulled the plug in early 1975 and dropped the Jeffersons into the slot, which blasted off immediately. Forgotten verdict, low-key, beautifully acted, squeezed by expectations no one could meet. Ivan the Terrible, an American sitcom in 1976 that tried to mine humor from life behind the Iron Curtain, is already working uphill. Ivan the Terrible set itself in a tiny Moscow apartment, crammed with a hotel waiter, his family, a Cuban exchange student boarder, and a feral off-screen wolfhound named Rasputin, who supposedly owned the only bedroom. This was summer replacement television at its most curious. Lou Jacoby anchored the chaos with deadpan resilience, while cameos and character bits skewered every Cold War stereotype they could squeeze into a half hour. 5 episodes aired across late August to mid-September. The series had a satirical spark, but it arrived in the dog days with minimal promotion and asked viewers to laugh at a place many only read about in headlines. That distance made the jokes feel like postcards from a country few understood beyond caricature. Still, there is something appealing about the audacity. Imagine trying this premise during détente and expecting America to warm up to Soviet family life. The show flashed a hint of what single-set farce could do with global politics, then vanished. Forgotten verdict, brave idea, rough timing, and a summer slot that guaranteed it would be a question on TV trivia night. The Montefuscos. NBC launched The Montefuscos in September 1975 with a full platter of family energy. 3 generations gathered weekly in New Canaan, Connecticut, talking loudly, hugging hard, and announcing punchlines as if the neighbors were hard of hearing. The network put it up against the Waltons and Barney Miller. That was a scheduling dare, and the ratings answered quickly. Within 3 weeks, NBC announced the show would be dropped from the schedule after October. Critics took out the carving knives, blasting the series for leaning on stereotyping instead of character. And yet, the network burned off 8 produced episodes through late October, even as the cancellation notice hung over it. Look closely, and you can see a template that works elsewhere. Food as ritual, a family calendar built around meal times. Crosstalk that becomes musical if the writers find the right rhythm. It just never found the rhythm. The press nicknamed it Montefiascos. That stung, but the deeper issue was timing. Up against 2 polished players, the series needed sharper scripts and a more grounded voice to survive. Forgotten verdict. An idea with a sturdy core, scheduled to lose and written too broadly to fight its corner. Apple pie. When Maude wrapped in spring 1978, Norman Lear rolled the dice on Rue McClanahan as a lead. Apple Pie dropped viewers into Kansas City in 1933 with Ginger Nell Hollyhock, a lonely hairdresser who who essentially builds her own family through a flurry of personal ads. In walks a con man husband named Fast Eddie. In tap dances, a daughter with showbiz sparkle. A son dreams of flying. A grandfather bumps into furniture and still gets the best lines. The tone is whimsical and slightly surreal, like a vaudeville scrapbook animated and handed a laugh track. 2 episodes aired, then 6 completed episodes never saw broadcast. Why the quick exit? Saturday at 8:30 is a tough demand for any series that is not an event. Add a period setting, a stylized voice, and the expectation that Rue would transmogrify into a different kind of star overnight. And you have a fragile launch. The directing was in steady hands with Peter Boner's. The premise was genuinely unusual, but viewers did not know how to categorize it, and without time to grow, it drifted away. Forgotten Verdict, a sweet, odd confection that needed the patience of a mid-season run, and got the attention span of a weekend errand. Mr. T and Tina. Before Pat Morita became a household name in films, he headlined this short-lived ABC sitcom in fall 1976. Spun out of a character introduction on Welcome Back, Kotter. He played Taro Takahashi, a brilliant Japanese inventor who relocates his family to Chicago and hires Tina Kelly as live-in help for his children. The tone swung between fish-out-of-water misunderstandings and gadget gags. It was one of the first American sitcoms with a largely Asian-American cast, which mattered, but the scripts chased easy misunderstandings instead of building a warm core that could last beyond the pilot rush. 9 episodes were produced, 5 aired across late September through October, and the series was replaced in the slot almost immediately. The press was unkind, the time period pitted it against other established shows, and the audience never took the ride. You can still feel the importance of the attempt, though. Network television rarely handed the keys to an Asian American lead in the 70s. That alone makes it worth remembering, even as you wince at jokes that feel like a tug-of-war between bold casting and timid writing. Forgotten Verdict, a meaningful first step, tangled in a show that did not yet know how to carry its weight. Holmes and Yo-Yo. You want high concept? Try a straight-arrow detective paired with a brand-new android partner who prints photos from his mouth and magnetizes silverware at crime scenes. That was ABC's Holmes and Yo-Yo in 1976, with Richard B. Schull's weary cop trying to babysit John Schuck's cheerful robot while solving actual cases. The show walked a tightrope between comic mishaps and procedural beats. Every week, Yo-Yo's body would misfire like a jammed copier. His chest camera would whir. His circuits would glitch at the worst possible moment. That physical comedy built a rhythm you could recognize from a mile away. And when it landed big. The problem was tone. Viewers didn't quite know whether to treat it like a police spoof or a warm buddy comedy about a decent man teaching a machine to be human. The writing nudged both ways, then split the difference. Even so, the production values were crisp, the leads were cast exactly right, and the concept had a lovable, gentle heart that separated it from louder network fare. 13 episodes aired across the 1976 to 1977 season, with the final 2 held until late summer after an early stop order. In a different slot, with tighter farce mechanics and a firmer identity, this could have been a quirky cult staple. Forgotten Verdict, sincere, silly, and sabotaged by its own half-step between spoof and sweetness. Lots of luck. Blue-collar sitcoms were everywhere in the early 70s, but Lots of Luck found a specific lane. Dom DeLuise played Stanley Belmont, a decent guy stuck in the lost and found at the city bus company, propping up a household that never quite gets its act together. The charm was in the grind. Stanley clocks in, rummages through the debris of 100 commutes, trades wisecracks with his buddy, then trudges home to a chorus of needs and noise. It was adapted from the British smash On the Buses, and you can feel the bones of that older show in the setups and family rhythms. On paper, that sounds like a ready-made winner. In practice, cultural translation is hard. The UK original leaned into bawdy workplace banter and local flavor. The NBC version softened the sharper corners, shifted the emphasis to home life, and relied on Dom's generous timing to keep the engine humming. Some episodes sing, especially when Kathleen Freeman bulldozes a scene as the force of nature mom. and when the show embraces the oddball treasures that pass through the depot. But the ratings were middling, and the network moved on after one season. It did not fail for lack of a star or a premise. It sputtered because the humor needed a touch more bite to stand out on a busy schedule. Forgotten Verdict. A warm, watchable import that never quite found the sharper punchline it needed. The girl with something extra. Sally Field and John Davidson play a blissed-out couple who discover on the wedding night that the bride can read minds. That alone would panic most sitcom husbands. The series uses it to test a romance in slow motion. Every stray thought becomes a problem. A doubt that would have faded now sits on the coffee table and asks for airtime. The best episodes treat the mind reading as a metaphor for young love. What if you really knew what your partner was thinking before they figured it out themselves? What if you had to decide when to speak and when to let a feeling pass? NBC slotted the series for the 1973 to 1974 season and gave it a full order. 22 episodes aired. You can see the network trying to steady the tone across the run. Early on, the ESP drives the plot. Later, the stories downplay it and tilt toward classic domestic mishaps, as if the show were being sanded down into a simpler newlywed comedy. That sanding removed some of the spark because the thing that made the concept special was the risk. Field is luminous either way, flitting between certainty and second thoughts. The show earned curious eyes but not long-term loyalty, and it closed after a single season. Forgotten Verdict. A bright idea about intimacy that got nervous about its own power and lost the very edge that made it sing. The Corner Bar. A neighborhood pub can be a perfect sitcom engine. Regulars, walk-ins, and a bartender who sees everything. The Corner Bar tried the 2 summers in a row for ABC starting in 1972, swapping owners between seasons and tuning the ensemble to find the right mix. Some jokes were broad, some were whispered. What the show really had, though, was a milestone. Among the regulars was Peter Panama, a witty ascot-loving set designer played by Vincent Schiavelli, often cited as the first out-gay recurring character on American television. It was a small role. It was also a brave one for network TV at the time. The series itself never reached the easy chemistry that later bar comedies would master, and the summer schedule did it no favors. Still, you can feel a blueprint forming. The set was a crossroads. The dialogue lived in the back-and-forth rhythms of regulars who know each other a little too well. When it clicked, it felt like eavesdropping on a table you would happily join. When it missed, it sounded like a joke told one round too late. The legacy now lives less in the punchlines and more in the door it cracked open for representation on broadcast TV. Forgotten Verdict, a modest hangout show that quietly pushed history forward. Karen. Fresh off Room 222, Karen Valentine headlined a DC comedy in early 1975 as a staffer for a scrappy citizen lobby. Week after week, she waded into red tape, faced off with smooth talkers on the Hill, and tried to keep idealism afloat without losing her humor. The premise had snap. The episodes had a smart topical sheen. And if you squint, you can see the seed of later workplace comedies that blend issue of the week stories with character beats. The challenge, again, was tone. The show wanted to be breezy and timely all at once, which can work if the jokes arrive like clockwork and the stakes stay human. Karen never got that consistent rhythm. Some stories spark, especially when Valentine plays exasperation as a slow burn rather than a punchline. Others feel like headlines delivered as skits. ABC ran the series across the first half of 1975 and closed the book after a short, 13-episode run. You cannot say it lacked purpose. It simply needed sharper comic gears to convert good intentions into must-watch half hours. If anything, Karen now plays like an early draft of a format that would later thrive. A smart woman navigates a system built to say no, surrounded by oddballs who make the day survivable. Forgotten Verdict, a worthy try at topical comedy that deserved a second pass in a friendlier slot. We've got each other. Here is the setup you could pitch in one breath. He works from home as a commercial artist and handles the cooking and laundry. She commutes to Los Angeles to assist a demanding photographer who keeps life glamorous and chaotic in equal measure. That reversal was the point. The series wanted to show a marriage that swapped the usual 70s jobs and asked viewers to root for an arrangement that a lot of homes were quietly trying anyway. It came from MTM, which meant gentle wit, character grace notes, and a preference for small, telling moments over neon punchlines. So what went wrong? Timing and identity. CBS slid it into the famous Saturday corridor after the Bob Newhart show, effectively asking a modest new comedy to hold a block that used to include Mary Tyler Moore. That is not a test. That is a mountain climb in dress shoes. The writing team of Tom Patchett and Jay Tarses knew how to build human-scale laughs, and the cast could absolutely deliver. What the show never solved was the weekly comic engine that would force sparks in every episode without betraying its lived-in warmth. It lasted 13 episodes across 1977 and 1978, then closed shop. The idea aged well. The series did not get enough time to prove it. Forgotten verdict, smart premise, right company, wrong slot, and a gentle voice that needed a longer runway. Detective School, one flight up. The promise was catnip. A burnt-out private investigator teaches a bargain detective class in a shabby building. His students range from earnest to half-prepared to gloriously clueless. Every lesson spills into a real case, and by the final tag, the class has survived another round they probably were not ready for. James Gregory anchored it with weary authority as Nick Hannigan, a man who has seen it all and would like to see less. The students pulled him into messes anyway. That was the weekly kick. The classroom was a clown car, the streets were a surprise quiz, and the exam was whether anyone made it back without losing their lunch or their rented surveillance gear. The mechanics were there. A case of the week, a recurring group dynamic that could shift alliances and fuel running jokes. A veteran lead who could throw a deadpan that could stop a bus. 13 episodes aired in 1979, sometimes described in 2 short blocks, with a summer taste and a fall return. And then the school shuttered. The series needed a little more snap in the plotting and a slightly firmer tone. At its best, it felt like community college Columbo, with a laugh track and a fondness for oddballs. At its wobbliest, it felt like sketch comedy with a badge. Forgotten verdict. The cast chemistry was promising, the premise was money, and the bell rang before the writers could refine the playbook. Flatbush. CBS launched this Brooklyn buddy comedy in 1979 and discovered a limit the hard way. The show followed 5 neighborhood pals with swagger, hustle, and a habit of walking into trouble. On a different network in a different year, that crew might have read as warm knuckleheads. Here, the tone leaned broad, the jokes leaned easy, and the response from actual Brooklyn officials was immediate. The borough president complained that the series leaned on ugly stereotypes. That objection landed in headlines and cast a shadow over a show that was already light on genuine laughs. The run felt like a van stalling in an intersection. 6 episodes were produced, 3 aired, the rest stayed on a shelf. The idea of a local hangout comedy was not the issue. That model works when the characters are sharply drawn and the banter feels like detail rather than a label. Flatbush loved the label too much. In the postmortem, you can find defenders who argue the problem was ratings, not outrage. Fair point. Jokes that roar tend to survive even when the press is grumpy. These did not roar. Forgotten verdict. A loud concept that confused attitude with character and got yanked after a chorus of boos and a shortage of belly laughs. The Waverly Wonders. Joe Namath had the charisma. NBC had a plan. Hand him a sitcom about a former pro basketball player who washes up at a Wisconsin high school to teach history and coach a basketball team that has forgotten how to win. You can see the charm immediately. The coach is great with swagger and not so great with dates on a timeline. The kids are scrappy and funny, and there is a stern foil down the hall to balance the pep talks. The problem was speed. The show premiered in early September 1978 and was gone by the first week of October. 4 episodes aired from a batch of 9 that were produced. The slot was a minefield. It faced variety on one side and a superhero action hour on the other. Ratings were soft, reviews were cooler than expected, and NBC swapped it out for a new Arnold Jackson comedy that raced into the top third of the season. That swap told you everything. The network wanted a fast hit. Waverly was a gentle trier that needed more reps and a lead still finding his comic reads. Namath loosened up as the run went on, and you can see a version of the show that could have played like a warm Friday night hangout if given time. Forgotten Verdict. A better idea than execution, with a lovable pitch that threw an interception in the first quarter. Blansky's Beauties. Happy Days was a factory for hits. Gary Marshall's team rolled out a small universe of related shows, some legendary and some barely out of the wrapper. Blansky's Beauties was the one that never found its beat. Nancy Walker starred as a showbiz den, mother in Las Vegas, wrangling a lineup of dancers and hopefuls while a cluster of future names breezed through. The series carried direct links to the Milwaukee Empire. Actors and character connections crossed over. Theme energy felt familiar, and the vibe tried to bottle the same fizz in a new setting. That is a tall order. The Wisconsin nostalgia of Happy Days and the blue-collar zing of Laverne and Shirley came with built-in tone. Vegas backstage comedy needs precision, rhythm, real backstage texture. The show tried to pace charm where specificity should go, and the seams showed. ABC ran 13 episodes from February through June of 1977, then called time. In the years since, the curiosity value has only grown. You can spot familiar faces, catch the shared universe links, and still feel the emptiness where a comic center should be. Forgotten Verdict. A high pedigree project that thought proximity to a hit would do the heavy lifting, then learned every show needs its own reason to exist. See the pattern. The 70s were packed with experiments, some brave, some messy, many left behind after a handful of airings. You met a homemaker husband who deserved a second season, a robot spiritual cousin chasing clues with night students, a Brooklyn crew that lost the room, a quarterback turned coach, and a Vegas chorus with no song. Which one gets your vote for a modern revival, and who would you cast to fix it? Drop your picks, hit subscribe, and share this with the friend who thinks they have seen it all.